All right, let's jump right into this explainer. If you're gearing up for that big U.S. history final, you are absolutely in the right place. We are going to do a massive, comprehensive review of the essential vocabulary, key figures, and major events that transformed modern America, starting from the Gilded Age and taking us all the way through the Roaring Twenties. Let's get into it. We're going to ditch the flashcards for a second and look at the big picture chronologically. We'll be heading four major eras: urbanization and city corruption, the Progressive Era reforms, America claims an empire, and finally, World War I and the Roaring Twenties. Seeing how these historical dominoes fall is the secret to really getting it, because you'll understand exactly how all these major events triggered one another. So, part one, urbanization and city corruption in the late 19th century. Let's start our journey in the chaos of these rapidly expanding cities. A crucial sequence you really want to lock down for the test is how this massive urban growth, driven by a crazy industrial boom and huge waves of immigration, led to some intense growing pains. I'm talking about immense tragedies like the 1871 Great Chicago Fire that left 100,000 people completely homeless. Out of all this chaos, we see the rise of powerful political machines like Tammany Hall under Boss Tweed. But on the flip side, it also sparked the social gospel movement. Think of Jane Addams and Ellen Gate Starr stepping up to found the Hull House in 1889 to provide direct aid to the urban poor. Now, all this rapid demographic change sparked some serious nativism. And you absolutely need to know the contrast between two major immigration policies of the time. First, you've got the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, which was a hardcore congressional ban on almost all Chinese immigrants. Compare that with the later Gentlemen's Agreement. This was more of a diplomatic handshake deal designed to limit the entry of unskilled Japanese workers. But the bottom line? Both policies were deeply rooted in a blatant favoritism toward native-born Americans. And while immigrants are trying to navigate those harsh restrictions, city politics are essentially being run by political machines. Keep the image of Boss Tweed locked in your brain for this. He is the poster child for using illegal political influence for personal financial gain. By the way, the vocab word for that is graft. Make sure you know that one. These machines also thrived on patronage, basically the spoils system, handing out comfy government jobs to their buddies who helped them get elected, completely ignoring whether they were actually qualified for the gig. Okay, moving on to part two, the Progressive Era reforms. What's really fascinating here is that the progressive movement was basically a direct reaction to all those urban and corporate messes we just talked about. Let's do a rapid-fire review of the heavy hitters who sought to return government control to the people. You've got Jane Addams pioneering the settlement house movement. Then there's Upton Sinclair. He was the muckraking journalist who aimed for America's heart, but as the saying goes, hit it right in the stomach. His gross-out novel The Jungle blew the lid off the disgusting meatpacking industry and directly sparked the 1906 Meat Inspection Act. Don't forget Fighting Bob La Follette, who boldly took on the giant railroad monopolies. Or Florence Kelley, an absolute powerhouse who championed labor rights, fighting to prohibit child labor and limit crazy working hours. All right, quick knowledge check for you to test your memory of progressive legislation. Which 1914 law explicitly exempted labor unions from antitrust prosecution? Take a second to think about it. If you guessed the Clayton Antitrust Act, you nailed it. This is a massive test prep favorite because it did two huge things. It cracked down on corporate monopolies while officially protecting the rights of labor unions from being prosecuted as monopolies themselves. A real game changer. Now, right alongside these labor and corporate fights, you've got to understand the totally distinct approaches to civil rights happening at the exact same time. You will almost certainly see a question asking you to contrast Booker T. Washington with W.E.B. Du Bois. Washington was all about gradualism, right? He believed that acquiring vocational skills and proving economic value would slowly end racism over time. Du Bois? He fundamentally rejected that slow burn approach. He helped launch the Niagara movement, demanding immediate social and economic equality, no waiting around. So when you look at life right around 1900, everything is colliding. You've got this wild mix of scientific breakthroughs, the explosion of mass culture, new consumer goods, and the expansion of public schools, all crashing head-on into the ugly reality of brutal segregation and Jim Crow laws. The entire fabric of American life was being completely and totally rewoven. That brings us to part three, America claims an empire. Let's see how this all builds. Having rapidly built up its industrial muscle at home, the United States starts looking beyond its borders, pushing for global power. The big question you need to be able to answer is why? Why the push for imperialism? Simply put, America was thirsty. thirsty for new international markets to sell its booming agricultural and manufactured goods, and hungry for global military strength. It was a massive, highly controversial shift in geopolitics. And the violent match that lit the powder keg for this outward expansion? The explosion of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor in 1898. Thanks to some serious sensationalizing by newspaper titans engaging in yellow journalism, this one explosive event ignited the 15-week Spanish-American War. Let's trace this imperial momentum really quickly. It kicks off with the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy in 1893. Then you get that brief 1898 war with Spain, which suddenly lands the U.S. with Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. Just a year later, in 1899, Secretary of State John Hay drops the open door notes to make sure the U.S. secures trade access in China. And the whole era basically peaks in 1914 with the opening of the Panama Canal, an absolute engineering marvel that really cemented America's new role as a world power. To really visualize this, think of it like a restaurant menu, where Uncle Sam is sitting down to a bill of fare, offering up Cuba, the Philippines, and other newly acquired lands. It is the perfect visual metaphor for things like the Platt Amendment. The U.S. basically strong-armed Cuba into adding this to its constitution. It severely limited Cuba's treaty-making power and gave the U.S. the right to intervene whenever it wanted, effectively turning Cuba into an American protectorate. But listen, it's absolutely crucial to remember that this imperial expansion didn't just happen quietly. It faced fierce resistance. Think about Hawaii's Queen Liliuokalani. She powerfully protested the U.S. takeover, fully realizing her reign was over when more than 160 U.S. sailors and Marines stood ready to back the white business groups conspiring to depose her. She did not go down without raising her voice. All right, final stretch, part 4, WWI and the Roaring Twenties. Let's see how these growing global entanglements eventually pull America into the Great War, which is then immediately followed by a profound cultural whiplash. Notice the massive gap between the start of the war in Europe in 1914 and American entry. A huge stepping stone toward the U.S. finally abandoning its neutrality was the horrific sinking of the passenger liner Lusitania by a German submarine in May 1915. Fast forward to April 1917, and the U.S. officially enters the fray, tipping the balance until the armistice is signed in November 1918. And after the dust settled, the American public suffered a massive hangover. Following the bloody reality and the staggering human cost of World War I, people were exhausted. They embraced a policy of isolationism, essentially pulling away from world affairs, completely desperate to avoid any further European conflicts. But here's the catch. Turning inward did not magically create peace at home. Not even close. The early 1920s were marked by incredibly deep domestic tension and anxieties. You had the Red Scare, massive labor strikes breaking out everywhere, and the infamous Palmer Raids, which were these sweeping government operations targeting anyone suspected of being a radical or a communist. Despite all that underlying political tension, the 1920s still roared with major domestic changes you definitely need to know for your exam. In 1920, the 19th Amendment is finally ratified, granting women the right to vote. Culturally, though, nativism reared its head again with the Emergency Quota Act, sharply reducing immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe. But economically, the boom was on. It was fueled by Henry Ford's mass-produced automobiles and a brand-new consumer system called the installment plan. For the first time, Americans could buy expensive goods and pay them off over time on credit. Sound familiar? All right, let's wrap this up with one final checkpoint to test your knowledge on the diplomatic aftermath of World War I. Take a second to think about the Treaty of Versailles. What punishing provision forced Germany to accept sole structural responsibility for WWI? If you said the war guilt clause, you've got it. By forcing Germany to accept all the blame, it totally planted the seeds of future global disaster. So as you wrap up this study session and head into your exam, take a step back and look at the big picture. How did the rapid urbanization, the aggressive push for an empire, and the debt-fueled, credit-crazy economic boom of the 1920s we've covered today ultimately set the stage for the next massive historical crisis, the Great Depression? Keep that exact provocative thought rolling around in your head as you review your notes. You are going to crush this final.